She had him check into a cheap motel, but the following morning she learned he was the sole owner of the establishment. The Santa Monica Hotel's lobby, the Sterling Heights, was bustling with activity. The hotel was bustling with activity on this Friday night, from tired guests checking in to bellhops navigating luggage carts and the gentle sound of conversation reverberating off the marble floors. No, this hotel wasn't like any other. There was no mistaking its magnificence. A chandelier that glistened in the center of the ceiling and cost more than most homes adorned the entrance, which was framed by towering palm plants. As she stood behind the front desk, she was in her mid-30s and looked exhausted from the day's constant activity. Over the past 12 hours, she had skillfully managed a succession of demanding guests, last-minute room requests, and the rare irate caller who insisted their reservation had been misplaced. Rachel did not want any more surprises tonight. Despite looking fresh first thing in the morning, her patience had worn thin, and her uniform had begun to show the subtle creases of a lengthy shift. Once again, the lobby doors opened amid this orchestrated mayhem. At first sight, the man who entered was nondescript. He wore worn-out trousers, sneakers, and a hoodie. Instead of carrying any bags, he simply had a leather messenger bag draped over one shoulder. He looked about the room as if trying to find someone or anything. Then he paused. Nobody paid much attention to him. The personnel went around purposefully as guests carried on with their talks. There was something peculiar about his demeanor, but he was only another late-night wanderer. In contrast to the frantic enthusiasm of most last-minute visitors, his relaxed demeanor was noticeable. He seemed unfazed by the chaotic environment around him, radiating an air of serene confidence. Also, the receptionist took note of him, but she didn't think much of his silent assurance. His untidy appearance was what first drew her attention and caused her to form an opinion. With a repressed sigh, Rachel stole a glimpse in the man's direction as he walked up to the desk. His tears or annoyance was starting to boil over, and she could feel it starting to boil over. She had the impression that those trying to bargain for a better fee or weary travelers who wouldn't accept no for an answer were the regular aggravators when they showed up late at night. And just by looking at this man, she had a good idea of which group he would belong in. Good evening, the man replied in a low-key, unassuming voice. I'd like to book a room for the night, please. A smile, barely reaching Rachel's eyes, was something she forced. Unfortunately, we're completely booked for tonight, sir, she responded with a quick but courteous tone that belied her professionalism. Hostess not pretending to affirm what she already knew, she tapped on her keyboard. The guide took a moment to respond. He bent his head ever so slightly, examining her with a subtle curiosity that unsettled her. He inquired, his voice barely audible, fully booked, had a single room available. Sensing a dispute developing, Rachel tensed up. Indeed, today has been jam-packed and every room here is full. She gestured toward the bustling lobby full of guests to drive home her point. Here's a motel a few blocks down. They might have availability. She believes she caught a glimpse of a grin on his face as her remarks lingered in the room. However, it vanished just as swiftly, being supplanted by a subtle smile that fell just short of reaching his eyes. He looked up into her eyes as he leaned slightly on the counter. No cancellations? No options at all? He inquired, his tone betraying neither frustration nor arrogance, but pure curiosity. Pieces of annoyance spread over Rachel. Why couldn't he simply accept her response and depart? With an air of condescension, she said, "Sir, I don't think this is the right place for you." Her gaze swept over his sweatshirt and pants, making it clear this wasn't the right place for someone like him. Like I said, there's a motel nearby. They'll probably have something that fits your situation. Now that his expression was unreadable, the man straightened up. Just when Rachel thought he was going to protest, he nodded and retreated from the counter. He said, "Thank you for your time with poise." Instead of going for the exit, he turned around and made his way to the seating area of the lobby where he settled into a corner chair that overlooked the front desk. Cecil kept working, but she couldn't help but look over at him every so often. Why was he even there? Why was he still there? She brushed off the nagging suspicion that there was more to the man than what first appeared. Worrying about uninvited strangers added another layer of stress to her already difficult career. Nothing about his silent observation made her feel nervous, though, so she ignored it. Ultimately, what options did he have? Minutes passed, and Rachel attempted to dispel the unsettling feeling that someone was watching her. From his corner seat, the man hadn't budged. He glanced about the lobby every so often, but always returned to her. She reassured herself that it was irrelevant. He was merely an unnamed somebody who refused to accept no for an answer, nothing more. Still, with each glance to the side, her annoyance increased. The lobby started to get more subdued as the clock hit 11. Rachel was left with a more manageable duty as the number of guests decreased. She was relieved to know that her shift was almost over, so she sighed. The sole thing that kept her going was the idea of eventually relaxing at home with a glass of wine. However, her relief did not last. "Excuse me," the man muttered, his voice barely audible as he stood up at the desk once again. Rachel was taken aback by his abrupt approach, but she swiftly put on her composure, summoned from her hard day of practice. Yes, she answered, her voice more forceful than she had planned. This time, she skipped the effort of trying to fake a smile. I'm sorry to bother you again, he continued in a cool and collected manner, but I couldn't help noticing that a few guests seemed to have just checked in. Are you sure there's no room available? A crack appeared in Rachel's composure. Excuse me, but I've already explained this to you, she stated while crossing her arms. Those guests had reservations, which is why they got rooms. I don't know what else to tell you. Despite her annoyance, he continued to nod. I see. He responded after some contemplation. And if I wanted to make a reservation for tomorrow night, would that be possible? Rachel, taken aback, blinked. She asked again tomorrow. His voice remained excruciatingly calm as he asked yes. Is there availability tomorrow? As she tested the system, her fingers flew across the keyboard and she scowled. With a hint of hesitation, she confessed, we do have rooms available tomorrow. However, I'm uncertain how that will impact your stay for tonight. He smiled slightly and replied, it's good to know, but ultimately, it didn't matter. Rachel's level of annoyance rose. She was unsure of why, but her gut told her his tone was nearly arrogant. Listen, I'm sorry, but I just don't have the time for this. She stayed with an unintentionally raised voice. If you don't have a reservation and you can't afford to stay here, then maybe you should stop wasting both our time and go to that motel I told you about. There was a palpable weight to the words. Though his face remained unchanged, the man's eyes showed a transformation. With an almost imperceptible nod, he retreated a step. Understood was his simple response. Remaining composed, he silently made his way back to his place in the lobby corner. Rachel briefly had a pang of shame, but she immediately pushed it aside. He was not an issue for her. She believed her work was done, and that was the end of it. However, there was an unsettling sensation she couldn't shake the way he observed her, serene and unruffled. Rachel continued working as the hours passed, but she couldn't help but notice the man standing in the corner. He 110, he remained completely silent. His expressionless stillness was unsettling, and he hardly made a sound as he sat silently. Once in a while, his eyes would wander to the front desk, as if mentally taking note of every aspect. Rachel attempted to tell herself that it was irrelevant because the lobby was always bustling with people doing things like waiting for rides, meeting up with friends, or just wasting time. However, this individual was neither perusing a magazine nor checking his phone. He merely observed. She noticed him watching a young bellhop at 845 as he clumsily maneuvered a large luggage cart. She was taken aback when the man got to his feet and came over to offer assistance. He helped the overworked bellhop learn to balance the cart with a few simple tweaks, and the employee beamed with gratitude. Observing the conversation, Rachel scowled. To what extent was this individual naive? He was still a waste of her time, even though he pretended to be a good Samaritan. However, she also became aware of additional details as the evening progressed. Even while other visitors ignored them, the man paid attention to them all. 920, he saw the concierge calmly deal with an irate couple who wanted upgrades. As soon as the cleaners came, he saw the sweeping the glass doors clean. Additionally, he witnessed Rachel becoming irate with a colleague over a straightforward inquiry regarding the reservation system. From time to time, he would steal an unreadable glance her way. It lacked anger or judgment and was instead contemplative, like he was putting together a puzzle. As the clock struck 12, the man rose from his seat and slung his leather bag over his shoulder. At 954, a sigh of relief washed over Rachel. She hoped that he would finally go now that she felt like everyone was staring at her. He acknowledged the host's hospitality with a low, measured voice. Rachel sighed and turned away from her computer as he wandered distractedly toward the exit, murmuring, have a good night. He halted briefly before entering the rotating doors. He cast a final glance around the foyer, taking in the spotless flooring, the illuminating chandelier, and the subdued activity of the workers working behind the scenes. At 10:29, he locked eyes with Rachel for the final time before he departed, a subtle smile playing on his lips. Here's an odd relief, but there was also this lingering tension that Rachel couldn't quite shake. She had no idea that what had happened that night was just the beginning. An impromptu team gathering took place the following morning in the conference room of the Sterling Heights Hotel. Still drowsy from her late shift, Rachel strolled in and yawned. Typical agenda items for such meetings included uninteresting policy updates or reminders to upsell services. At 11:04, she plopped down in a chair towards the rear of the room and continued to peruse her phone till the manager showed up. An odd hum of energy spread among the workers as the space filled up rapidly. Everyone looked to be wondering what the big news was, but nobody knew what it was. Even the senior workers appeared exceptionally attentive. Rachel noticed as she gazed around, it was clear that something had changed. The door swung open, and Mr. Calloway, the general manager, strode in, Being closely followed by a man just served to bolster his already self-assured demeanor. Rachel felt sick to her stomach. The guy she had fired last night was back, and he was just the same. In contrast to his previous attire, hoodie and jeans, he stood tall and collected in this tailored suit. "Good morning, everyone," started Mr. Calloway, his voice both kind and businesslike. "I hope you're all doing well. We have a very special guest with us today, someone who has taken a great interest in the operation of this hotel." Her thoughts were racing. Was this a criticism of some kind? Had he returned to cause a fuss over her treatment of him? As she slid further into her chair, her heart raced. Mr. Calloway introduced the new owner of the Sterling Heights Hotel, Mr. Elon Musk, with a smile on his face. There was total stillness in the room. All gazes shifted to the man whom Rachel had so angrily rejected the previous evening. His expression remained unchanged from the previous night, a subtle nod toward the room as he maintained his composed demeanor. Her heart stopped beating, and Rachel went limp. A man named Elon Musk, the owner of the hotel, was embarrassed by her. Her thoughts raced. Memories of our interaction last night kept popping into my head. The man she had thought was merely another untidy passerby was now the boss, and he stood before the whole workforce. With his hands slightly clenched in front of him, Elon advanced. "I've always thought that the real soul of any company is its employees." He started, his tone measured and contemplative. "That's why I like to see things for myself, without any filters or special treatment. Last night, I had the chance to observe how this hotel operates, from the incredible teamwork of the bellhops to the patience of the concierge staff. I saw a lot to admire." He allowed his remarks to permeate the room before continuing. After that, he looked across at Rachel. As he spoke to her directly, she felt a goosebump rise up her spine. "But I also saw moments that reminded me why attention to detail and kindness matter so much in the hospitality industry." Rachel felt sick to her stomach. His remarks carried an obvious gravitas, even if he refrained from using her name or specifically mentioning her. The air was heavy with anxiety, and nobody spoke a word. However, as Elon spoke, it became apparent that his intention was not to embarrass anyone, but rather to convey a profound message. A sense of foreboding pervaded the room as Elon's remarks loomed over the employees. His words weighed heavily on Rachel, and she felt her heart race. His steady and careful gaze on her made it clear that he was naming her, even if he hadn't done so. For fear of looking foolish, she fixated on her hands. Elon went on, his voice commanding but not harsh. "In a place like this, where people come expecting the best, how we treat them defines their experience. And sometimes even the smallest gestures, a smile, a bit of patience can make all the difference." He looked around the room, his expression changing as he waited. "I want to make something clear. This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about growth. Every person in this room plays a role in the success of this hotel, and I'm here because I believe in its potential and in all of you." Rachel stayed quiet, her mind racing, while the rest of the staff mumbled their approval. The way she had talked to him the previous night kept running through her head. It was all so obvious and preventable now. The condescension, the dismissiveness, disgrace engulfed her face. Starting today," said Elon, "I'll be working closely with management to ensure that our team has everything it needs to succeed. That includes training, support, and, yes, accountability. We owe it to ourselves and our guests to set the highest standards." Light applause erupted from the audience, and Elon nodded in acknowledgement. Whispers of discussion filled the air as employees filed out of the room as the meeting drew to a close. With her legs feeling like lead, Rachel remained in her seat. She sensed a presence at her side as she mustered the strength to stand. Glancing upwards, she beheld Elon. She felt her heart race. "Rachel, isn't it?" he inquired, maintaining a collected yet straightforward tone. Her jaw dropped as her mouth went dry. "Yes, sir," she whispered. For an uncharacteristically long while, he stared at her. Next thing she knew, he grinned at her with an innocent, almost comforting grin. "I know yesterday was a long day for you," he pointed out. "It's not easy to be at the front lines when things get busy. But remember, every interaction counts. People notice how they're treated, even when you think no one's watching." Without knowing what to say, Rachel hastily nodded. I get it," she mumbled. "And I'm so sorry about." With a gentle gesture, Elon severed her ties. "No need to apologize. Just learn from it. That's all I ask." After that, he nodded slightly and departed, leaving her to think alone. A tempest of thoughts raged through her head, including the encounter, the revelation, and his remarks. Oh, she felt the gravity of her decisions and the potential domino impact of her acts for the very first time during her career. For the sake of her own development and the guests, Rachel silently vowed to herself that she would do better from that point on. Rachel felt a range of feelings as she left the conference room: shame, remorse, and a glimmer of resolve. Elon's remarks lingered in her thoughts, serving as a cautionary tale more than a scolding. Although her actions stemmed from fatigue, she understood that they were unjustifiable. Kindness should be extended to every guest who walks through the doors, irrespective of how they seemed. Aja spent the following several weeks trying to change the way she approached her work. Even though she was exhausted, she welcomed each person with a warm grin. Slowly but surely, she felt the difference when she listened carefully rather than jumping to conclusions. Of the job, which had previously felt like a slog, took on a new meaning as guests responded warmly and colleagues began to depend on her more. The tale of the enigmatic proprietor evolved into an unspoken urban legend. Nobody on staff had a clue as to when Elon may be back, but the thought kept them all on edge. However, Rachel's reaction to the experience was not one of dread of being observed. She could see herself reflected in it, the ideal person she aspired to be. Instead of viewing her work as a means to an end, earning a living wage, she began to see it as a chance to make a positive impact on people's lives. She learned a simple but deep lesson that day. Compassion is priceless, and you can't judge a person by their looks. Conversation partners are always a mystery. Consider the potential effect of your remarks. As Rachel continued her remarkable journey at Sterling Heights, the story's lesson became crystal clear. Being kind doesn't cost anything, but the rewards can change your life. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this one if you found it enjoyable. We appreciate you tuning in and look forward to seeing you again soon.